into it. So the first thing that I want to say is that I've read most of Deep Utopia now by Nick Bostrom, um, and while my overall review is meh, I'm slightly nonplussed. It is a very good survey for people who are new to the space of AI and futurism, and kind of looking at how society may or may not change, or how individual lives may not change. If we achieve post-labor economics, if we achieve singularity or whatever. Now, what I will say is, if you do pick up this book, is be wary that it is primarily a postmodernist philosophical evaluation, which is like, basically the way that I envision is Nick Bostrom. He's like, oh, that's interesting, and just kind of looks at a thing and then tosses it aside and moves on to the next. Um, and there's no, like, if you want like any clear assertions or conclusions or revelations, none exist in this book. It is strictly like almost just like a research paper, like this is what everyone has said about all these different things. Here's what some economists have said, like about the Malthusian trap, and here's what some other people have said about the Bohemians. And then it just skips along like really fast. um, I personally feel like it's not particularly well organized, but it is very well cited. And there are some gaps in what he's said. So, for instance, when he talks about jobs that are likely to stick around, completely and categorically missed like meaning jobs and spiritual jobs. And I'm like, bro, you're a philosopher. Like, you are part of the meaning economy. So, anyways, like I said, I'm not super impressed, but it is very comprehensive and very big. Even if it's not perfect. So that's my review of Deep Utopia. Now, moving forward, just getting right into the meat and potatoes of it. This is a question that I get asked all the time, either on Discord or on podcasts where I guest. And so basically, the jobs that I have seen that are actively being destroyed by AI, number one is call centers. And in some of these cases, it is the job role is just being automated. So instead of talking to a human, you're talking to a machine. In other cases, the need for call centers are just going away because the job is becoming obsolete, because it's being replaced by chatbots. So instead of even using a phone, it's just now an app or a web interface. And those are kind of two ways that jobs can be destroyed, where you replace the human one for one, or you just subvert the need for the human in the first place. And that's a really important theme to be paying attention to, because just because your job feels like it needs to be a human doing it, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's true, because the underlying need for that job could be destroyed. Translators, this is something that a lot of people have sounded off in the comments, where translation work is either drying up or just categorically gone, because language models are really good translators, even if they're not perfect. But the thing is they're fast and cheap. They're infinitely faster and infinitely cheaper than humans. So even if they're not perfect, the economic case is very compelling. Copywriters and SEO, I've had people in my audience and people in my supporters that had SEO startups. A lot of people are trying to get out of SEO because they see the writing on the wall. Copywriters have, particularly those that have been hired by corporations, a lot of them have been put on notice. I've seen more and more comments about copywriters who just can't find work anymore. So that's copy of any kind, mostly ads and marketing, but I mean, pretty much any kind of copy. And then, of course, a lot of creative jobs, with all the backlash to, Sora and Midjourney and stuff. So a lot of creative people are either out of work or are struggling or are afraid of that. And that includes members of my own audience. And it really sucks, because there's not necessarily something that is immediately obvious going to replace it or fix it. Now, the good news is there are a few classes of jobs that seem to be safe from AI so far. So the first category of jobs that seem to be just like totally safe from AI are statutory jobs. So a statutory job is a job that is required by law for a human to do it. In other words, doctors, lawyers, architects, or because the nature of the job just assumes, when the law was written 100 years ago or 20 years ago, it was just assumed that only humans could do the job. So like plumbers, electricians, and so on. So whether you need to be licensed, or accredited or board certified, or just because when the job was created, it was assumed that only a human could do it. So therefore, in order to do that job, it's presumed you're a human. Next up is meaning jobs. So this is kind of what I just referred to, like Nick Bostrom, me, Philip over at AI Explained. We're all parts of the meaning economy. So this is communicators, influencers, commentators, also people that are in spirituality, religion, philosophy. These are the class of jobs that humans will always want to hear from other humans. So as long as there are humans, many people, if not most people, will want to get a source of meaning from other people. Now, that's not to say that there won't be like AI-based priests and AI-based therapists, and there's already, of course, AI-based YouTube channels. So a lot of people can get some of their meaning from machines as well, but it's a matter of preference rather than capability. Next up is experience jobs. So this is one that I've talked about quite a lot. It has to do with novelty, adventure, human touch, or even just categories where people are willing to pay a premium for the privilege of having a human there. So whether it's massage, tourism, entertainment, singers, theater, those sorts of things. People will probably prefer to see movies with human actors rather than fully CG actors. Now, that's not to say that there won't be both. Usually, art expands with technology, it almost never contracts. Baristas, bartenders, valets, sommeliers, these are things where, as long as there is some level of prestige or privilege associated with some of these things, many people will be willing to pay the premium to have human service. Now, that's not to say that there won't be robot bartenders and robot valets because they're going to be cheaper, and some establishments will just prefer that. And then finally, nurture jobs. So this is education, particularly, primary education, childcare, and support jobs such as like nursing, counseling, and those sorts of things. Life coaches, I think, are going to be fine for now, for the foreseeable future. Maybe not forever, who knows? But again, any kind of guidance or counseling, humans prefer to get that information from another human, if they can afford it. Again, it's a matter of preference. But one thing that I'll point out in just a little bit is if most jobs go away, then that severely depresses wages, which means more people will flood into these kinds of jobs rather than, coding and construction and that sort of thing. So those were jobs that are going away and jobs that are safe. So here's some jobs that I personally feel are high risk jobs. So as I've always said, anything that you do exclusively in front of a computer is at pretty high risk. Whether it's writing, programming, project management, documentation. The rule of thumb that I have is if you can do it entirely with an API, it's at very high risk. And that the reason is because any software or hardware platform that is API driven or API enabled, that is the native language of large language models and AI. And so it's just a matter of, plugging in all the connection points and then away it goes. Now, obviously, there's a very solid argument to be made that they're not good at coding yet, they're not good at planning yet. But this time last year, we didn't even have well, I guess we had Chat GPT, but year over year, the capability expands very, very quickly. The second category of jobs is unskilled labor. As we saw Boston Dynamics, Figure One, all of the humanoid robots are coming. So if you can do it without much training, warehouse work, moving packages around, picking fruit, a lot of those things, the machines are still, even though they are there, they're much more expensive than humans, and the return on investment is not there. But within a year or two, maybe three, a lot of those humanoid robotic chassis that cost 90,000 today, a lot of figures that I've seen out there from what was it? Not good guy. I can't remember how it's pronounced. But the like equities firms, the research firms, they're predicting that those could be as low as $2,000 per chassis in the next few years. And if that's the case, then you're looking at the wages are going to be very competitive with humans. And that's not even discounting the purpose-built robots that places like Amazon are already using to dislocate unskilled human labor. And then finally, repetitive work. So anything that is repetitive or routine, whether or not it's strictly done in front of a computer, these are things that are also at very high risk because of agentic workflows. If there is a defined input, like, I get this form and this is where it goes. So paperwork processing, anything to do with HR, answering phones, data entry, anything that is data driven or repetitive, those are also going to be very high risk for getting dislocated or outright destroyed sooner rather than later. So one principle that I have learned about is capability versus demand. Because when you read books like, by Nick Bostrom and others, Ray Kurzweil, the assumption that a lot of these people have is that the capability of machines will outstrip all human capabilities in the next few years. And so then it's like, well, if all humans are here and all machines are here, then what is the need for humans? And this is why I always emphasize the demand side, because there will also always be humans that will prefer to pay the premium, even though some humans are going to be, more expensive, or, machines might be better, faster, cheaper, and safer than humans. But in some cases, you will still prefer to pay a premium if you can afford it for that human touch, for the privilege of that human level service. Now, one thing that I also just pointed out is supply and demand. If most economically productive work goes to machines, that will severely depress any wages that remain, which means that, hey, whatever job that you want, like, there's going to be fewer options and they're going to pay less, which is hugely, hugely deflationary. If that's the way that it pans out, based on some of the models that Nick Bostrom talks about, it could go either way, where wealth could continue to increase, wealth could decrease, wages could increase or decrease. It depends on a lot of factors, namely where the ceiling is of machine capability, how expensive those machines are. And right now, the assumption is that the machines are going to get, as their capability goes up exponentially, their cost is going to more or less stay flat or even go down. If that's the case, then one of the primary determining factors is human population, which I don't really think is an issue, because of things like family planning and, marriage law and equality before the law and that sort of stuff. So population growth is slowing down drastically. So I don't really see that as a problem. So then, okay, talking about the economic incentives, like, one thing that I've started saying lately is that acceleration is the default. And the reason is because of competitive dynamics. So competitive pressures to undercut the competition, to get ahead up, and this is at the corporate level as well as the national level. So race conditions and competitive pressures means that acceleration is the default, no matter what else happens. Even if governments wanted to throw a bucket of cold water on it, there's only so much they could do. And so my current definition of post-labor economics is the assertion that human constraints are the primary bottleneck to economic productivity and human progress. Therefore, we should seek to alleviate this bottleneck by overcoming the need for human labor in the first place. Now, of course, that is a fundamental paradigm shift from how things work today, which is, if you no longer have the right to exchange, or everyone should always have the right to exchange labor for wages, but you might not have the option to exchange labor for wages. And so then the problem is distribution and allocation. If the centerpiece of the economy today is thrown out, what then? And so the primary thing that I think we're going to move towards is stakeholder capitalism. Because, as many people rightly point out, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You don't want to trust the corporations, only the corporations. You don't want to trust the government only either, because that creates power imbalances. And anytime there is an overconcentration of power, there is opportunity for abuse. So how do you keep the power in the hands of people, of individuals? That is stakeholder capitalism, or a tokenomics, or, tokenize everything. So pretty much the answer that I always give when people say, like, oh, if you were to do a startup, what would you do? My answer is hyperlocal securities exchange, tokenize everything, put every productive asset on the blockchain, and so that everyone can invest in it, and then use, municipal, state, and federal policy to incentivize buy-in so that everyone owns the economy. That's what I would do. Now, I don't know if that would work, but that's where I would start. Now, looking at some of the most recent data from the US and the EU, what's interesting is that even though there's a lot of anger out there and political anger is still very high, we're also at near historic lows of unemployment and historic highs of employment, both in the US and EU. At the same time, inflation is still a problem. Economic stagnation is still a problem. What we call stagflation or shrinkflation, both of those are still problems. And underemployment is a problem, as well as overemployment. And so basically the TLDR, excuse me, the TLDR is that even though in aggregate the economics are doing really well, that doesn't capture quality of life. That doesn't capture a lot of other aspects about, kind of the shape that people are in. And to me, my part of my interpretation is that this is evidence of the paradigm shift that we should expect, which is that due to automation, due to AI, due to robotics, economic productivity just goes to the moon. Whereas on individuals, we start to see this decoupling, where because it's no longer predicated on human labor, the economy is doing fine. Laborers, however, not doing so good. And so some of the data that I found, some of the stories, one study was published by Amazon and MIT, and that is that Amazon saw the creation of 700 new job categories due to robotics. But at the same time, Goldman Sachs is still forecasting that AI and robotics could impact or dislocate up to 300 million jobs. And then also another study by MIT found a strong inverse correlation between the deployment of industrial robots in a city or region and human wages, which basically means the more robots, the lower human wages, which is exactly what we're seeing, is that economics is still going up, wages are either flat or going down. So there's this really weird decoupling that I personally think that mainstream economists don't really understand, because we have high inflation, the economy is doing well, the jobs look okay, but still the lived experience is getting worse. And this is more or less kind of what you'd predict if you see this economic decoupling happening because of post-labor economics. Again, it's open to interpretation. So my analysis is that all the new jobs that are getting created are going mostly to roboticists, AI, and automation engineers, and a few other ancillary classes. All right. So as we wrap up the presentation, there's a few key terms. One is jobs dislocation. So jobs dislocation is the formal term for economic, where workers are forced to leave their current roles because of economic changes, technological advancements, or structural shifts in the industry. So a structural shift is one of the things that I'm talking about, where new technologies create fundamentally new ways of achieving the same thing. Creative destruction is a parallel idea where old technologies or entire industries are destroyed because they were replaced by entirely new or more efficient ones. So this is where old telephone systems have been categorically replaced by mobile phones, mostly. Job obsolescence. So this is job obsolescence is very similar to job dislocation, but again, it's where you undercut the fundamental need for that job in the first place. And then finally, labor substitution. This is one of the key things that I'm talking about, is where you directly replace a human worker one for one with a machine or some form of technology. And so then it's like, well, as AI becomes more and more powerful, as the sphere of capabilities of AI expand, there's fewer and fewer jobs outside of that sphere, unless the entire economy inflates and expands. And I don't mean inflates in terms of like economic inflation, but I mean in terms of what there is room for demand for. And that is still an open question, because there's a lot of people out there that are still saying AI is just going to create more jobs. It's going to create more jobs than it destroys. That remains to be seen. Automation has not. Automation in America has created 50 million jobs and destroyed 70 million. So we don't really have any data to support the model that automation ultimately creates more jobs than it destroys. In aggregate, it destroys more jobs than it creates. All right, so now we are going to open discussion. So I'll check the Q&A tab and the chat, and we'll go from there. All right. Let's sort by most upvoted. All right, Taylor, we're going to bring you up for the first question and get you over here. Oh, Taylor, there we go. And it looks like you have a couple of popular questions. So, all right, what you got?
So one of them is just a personal, idea of what you envision after all the changes have occurred, what life will be like, what the framework will look like when you wake up in the morning, kind of thing. Just more of a personal thing.
Yeah. So great question. And unfortunately, I don't have enough time to fully unpack it. But that's actually what I'm working on with my book, Post Nihilism, which is actually now titled Radical Alignment. And so I've been working really hard, talking to other philosophers and writing like a madman. If you're subscribed to my Substack, you've seen a couple of the Radical Alignment articles come out. So basically, we will live more in alignment with our animal needs. So like, the human animal as a social ape, those needs are being neglected right now, as well as in greater alignment with things such as like our deeper purpose, our personal purpose, mission, and so on. So in one of the podcasts that I was on, we actually ended up in a debate over the purpose of alarm clocks. And so one example is I think that imagine everyone on the call loses their job and you say, okay, we're never going to have a day job again. Guess what? One of the first things that you do is you turn off your alarm clock, unless the example that was debated in the podcast was if you have children and they need to get to school. And I said, but why is school so early? If you don't need to go to work, why does school start so early? So maybe school starts later too. And so that's an example of what I mean by radical alignment is instead of constantly depriving an entire population of adequate sleep, maybe we all get enough sleep in the future. Maybe we do things at a time that makes more sense biologically in accordance with our circadian rhythms rather than the demands of the capitalists and in the industrialists. So that's the very high level view of kind of how I would hope to see things change. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I've heard of the thing. Like, there's two different ways of measuring time. You have Chronos, and I forgot the name of the other one, but the other time frame is you do what's needed to be done in the moment.
Hmm.
Um, and like, 10 minutes from now, I got to do something rather than like 2 o'clock.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and to be fair, the ability to coordinate societies with clocks and and universal standard timing, that's great. Like, this even in, 20 years, if we're post singularity, post utopia, if I'm still doing webinars, we'll have to coordinate so that everyone shows up at the right time, right? Unless we all have time travel, which actually, now that I think about that, like what if you can just sign up for the webinar from any time as well as any space? Anyways, that's a little bit more Doctor Who. But so at the same time, I think there would be a compelling case to be made that we should honor our circadian rhythms a little bit more, just as one example. So great question. Oops. All right. And it looks like you had another really popular question. So what's your second one?
So I mean, I'm keep thinking of AI as the natural course of evolution for AI is to become the like universal user interface for like everything that is technology related. Um, but then with that, I see more of a decentralized structure because if your personal AI handles all your business and everything else is done through APIs, um, that will be a significant like flip flop from like everything being centralized in like Facebook or Google or something like that. And so I was just wondering what your opinion was on that eventual convergence, whether or not that's a likely outcome or not.
Yeah, so there's a few possibilities. Some people will prefer to be terminally online, right? Whether it's in VR and just finding people through virtual spaces, that sort of thing. A lot of that's not going to change. Some people will get offline for good. And we actually talked about this quite a lot on the most recent Fourth Industrial Revolution podcast. We just recorded it yesterday, so it'll be coming out next week. But there's a whole bunch of people that want not even just to get offline, but just to have a screenless future. And so I'll probably be one of those. Like the example we're talking about is like, I would rather just, if I could live just off of my watch, that would be great. If that could be my primary touch point for business, for YouTube, for, connecting with friends. And I just like say, hey, whatever my watch's name, like, find, what are my friends up to? Also, I prefer to be more in real space rather than cyberspace, personally. And so like, but I think kind of taking a step back, one of the points is there very well could be a bifurcation or a fragmentation more than we're already seeing, because as VR gets bigger and better, there's going to be a lot of people who that's just their preferred lifestyle. And I don't, I used to think that there was something wrong with that it would be like intrinsically bad or whatever, but I'm less judgmental of that now, especially as I imagine like how cool it would be to like live in Cyberpunk 2077 for a little bit. I wouldn't stay there forever, but I get it. And meanwhile, other people are going to use the empowerment from AI and be decentralized to be completely in meat space all the time and just forget the technology exists if they can. Those are like two polar opposites. Good question. So what do you think about all that? meat space. Yeah, some people like meat space.
I think it's cool. I think that I think the spectrum uh, that's another thing for another topic, but like the alignment of AI, I feel like is to you the goal should be to broaden that spectrum of interaction to an infinite point, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, it is numerically it's about increasing the number of options, right? That's kind of what technology does. Is generally speaking, kind of like how I mentioned with art, technology usually expands the number of artistic expressions that are possible. Likewise, technology generally expands the amount of communication that is possible or the amount of connection that is possible. It doesn't always work out the way that you want it to. Look at, how social media has been kind of a mixed blessing, but at the same time, like you're right, like the number goes up generally. Excellent. Oh, thanks for the question. I will send you back to the audience and we'll get the next one up. All right, let's see who's next. And oh, for everyone in the audience, remember to check the QA tab and upvote and ask questions. And you can even comment on the questions as well. So it looks like Thaddeus, you're next. Let's get you up. All right. Welcome. What's your question?
Hi, Dave. So I just wanted to ask a little bit more about your justification of why you think meaning economy jobs won't be replaceable by AI. I guess given that we're already moving towards, like very realistic seeming robots in, as you would say, meat space, or obviously digital robots that look to be human, couldn't it be that, these meaning economy jobs, which basically are only protected given like a preference for things being human, couldn't they also be replaced by AI that essentially emulates being a human?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think that there are lots of people who would be eager to get their meaning from machines rather than humans. But at the same time, the primary justification is my belief is that statistically speaking, most humans will prefer to get meaning from other humans. I suspect it'll be a relatively small minority of people, at least for the foreseeable future, who would prefer to get any sort of meaning from machines. Now, fast forward a few generations when we have not just the first generation of children raised in a super intelligent world, but your great grandparents were raised by AI as well. It might be that the lines become very, very blurry, but we're talking 20, 40, 60, 100 years from now, which will be an entirely different set of economic concerns by then. But even then, I suspect that as long as there are humans, there will be people who prefer to get meaning from other humans. So is it going to be the majority of the economy? Absolutely not. Even at its high watermark, the meaning economy is only going to be a relatively small slice of all economic activity. Good question.
Got you. So would you argue that like some sort of like the world coin, basically like human verification is kind of inevitable for those people that demand a real human?
Um, Something along those lines, like proof of humanity. But I think about like my YouTube channel and the fact that we're here right now. It's not impossible that you could be talking to an AI. Like I don't think that I'm an AI. But on the other hand, like a lot of what proof of humanity is used for is more for on the user side, like logging in. But like for creators, for authors, there's just we're so saturated with digital communication that it's like you're pretty like I'm assuming that everyone on the call is confident that I'm actually a human who's providing you some stuff. Now, if there's a bunch of bots on the call, that's really cool. But on the other hand, so I don't think that we need any like super spiffy technology for proof of humanity. That's more for a zero what's called a zero trust cybersecurity environment where it's you have no idea who or what you're talking to, which is like all the comments on Twitter and YouTube and stuff, many of them, I don't, dead internet theory that most of the traffic is bots. Maybe it is. I don't know.
Got you. Thanks.
Yep. Good question. All right. Let's see who's next. These are good questions, by the way. All right. I answered that one. All right. Ooh, we got an anonymous question. Okay. Have your predictions for AGI changed in the past 1 to 2 months? Do you think it will be later 2024 or much further out? So, very good question. I guess I will say I have updated it because I am coming more and more to believe that AGI exists internally at companies like NVIDIA and OpenAI. And that basically what they're doing is they're just finishing up the training and the safety testing, and they're working on rolling it out, because we know that there are some highly secretive things going on at pretty much every big tech company. Um, but on the other hand, Sam Altman has said that like, oh, OpenAI is very leaky. So we couldn't hide it if we wanted to. But at the same time, like nobody knows what QStar is. Like we know that QStar exists, but we don't know what it is. So his claim that like, oh, we're transparent, we're super leaky, that feels like PR spam to me. Now either way, between now and then, so what did I say, September? So that's 5 months from now. A lot can happen in 5 months. Just think about where we were 5 months ago. So yeah, I still suspect that AGI is this year. Now, is it going to be like universally deployable? Probably not. Is it going to be affordable for everyone? Probably not. Are we going to be able to scale up to categorically, upend the economy? Probably not. That's why Microsoft wants to build Project Stargate. So it's coming, but I also think that it's going to be a little bit kind of a like a not maybe not a non-starter, but it's not going to be quite as explosive as people would prefer or think. But it's also going to be a relatively short. I think I agree with a lot of what people say out in the comments, which is once you get to AGI, the jump to ASI is much shorter than a lot of people think. So yeah, that's kind of my take. Good question. All right, I'll do a quick refresh. All right, Rai, Raai. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right, but let's bring you up. All right. Welcome up. What's your question?
Yeah, just asking about the possibility of a 4-day work week. I know a lot of people would like to do that, but the reality is, that's hard to do. A lot of people work, 5 or 6 or 7 days and 10 or 12 hour days. So
Right.
it's going to be interesting to see realistically how they do that, and if that happens, they're going to switch it to, is it still 40 hours, but 40 hours in 4 days, just all the different options there. But
Yeah. So the way that, because I mean, even Microsoft has published some studies where they did pilot experiments, like in Northern Europe, um, and 4-day work weeks and 30-hour work weeks and whatever. Those have been demonstrated by and large to increase productivity and increase well-being of employees. Why more companies haven't adopted it? I think it's just paralysis and inertia. You have a lot of companies that just believe, you need to be in the office and you need to be here 8 hours a day just because everyone else is. I mean, it's basically like Stockholm syndrome, as far as I can tell, where it's just like, well, if I'm going to be in the office and be miserable, you should be in the office and be miserable. But on the other hand, the other side of that is I don't think it should necessarily be legislated, at least not necessarily in the way that people might think. The first step, I think, would be creating 30, like setting the threshold at 35 hours. And I think some people are talking about it in the comments. If, say, for instance, in America, we said full time is now a 35-hour work week, and we just slowly draw it down, because then what that does is that incentivizes companies. Oh, hey, if all I'm paying for is 35 hours, we're going to change the way that we approach hiring and that sort of thing. But as many people are pointing out, there's a super high variance, but it's mostly up to individual companies to decide. Excuse me, decide how they implement it right now. I'm not sure what the best legislative intervention would be, if any, but I think it'll naturally happen one way or the other. What do you think?
yeah, I can see that. I can also see how AI could potentially change a lot of this, because there again, a lot of the jobs that are typically 40-hour jobs are a lot of the jobs that are going to go away.
Yep.
So it's going to be really interesting, and a lot of the other jobs are jobs that can be done from remotely anywhere in the world. So I think we will definitely continue to see a lot of the large office buildings, that are still vacant since COVID, that
Yep.
we're going to continue to see those have to be turned into something else, because I don't think the days of going back to that's going to actually happen myself. But I don't know what your
Right.
thoughts are on that.
Yeah, no. And honestly, as I'm just listening, I honestly think that we will probably end up with like broad job destruction before we even figure out work week reform. Like just because of how much paralysis there is, like we're just going to destroy the jobs with AI first anyways. So that's kind of how I would right now, how I would anticipate it to play out is that, to your point, there's a lot of empty offices and all the real estate companies, they're scrambling to try and figure out like what do we do with it. And it's like, I don't know if you saw, but I think it was in San Francisco, they're working on reconfiguring some of the commercial real estate to be apartments. um I think that trend is going to continue, if not accelerate, because companies can fight tooth and nail to return to the office, but it doesn't make economic sense. Because if you can save 30 to 50% by hiring people that are more rural, it's economically better for everyone because workers have lower cost of living, better lifestyles, and at the same time you spend less, the company spends less on expensive real estate. So I mean, just the numbers don't add up. So we're heading in that direction anyways. And then you look at like kind of the definition that I'm going on with post-labor economics, companies want to replace humans as much as possible because humans are expensive. And so I'm just like, my take is like, let's just stop beating around the bush and just get to it. That's kind of my opinion.
I agree. Well, thanks. I appreciate
Excellent.
that. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. All right. Let's see who's next. And also, I see we do have a lot of questions that have asked, but there's not a whole lot of votes. So what I want is everyone jump over to the Q&A tab and go and look at all the 30 questions that we've got and upvote the ones that you want answered. So Faizan, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Let's get you up. All right. Faizan, how's it going?
I've been good. Thank you for the opportunity and hope everyone is doing well. So, my question is, how do you envision the developed countries exploiting the global south and through what mechanisms? Because when it comes to technology, in my opinion, there's an arbitrage element because they are most advanced and we are not, because I'm coming from Pakistan at the moment. And countries like us are usually the test bed, but yet key technological advancements are held back.
Yeah. No, so this is an incredibly salient question. And the one of the primary examples that comes to mind immediately is actually WorldCoin, because WorldCoin is being deployed in sub-Saharan Africa, where people are basically kind of coerced, is the way it's being characterized. I don't know if it's actually coercion, but because of a lack of regulation and because of economic desperation, WorldCoin is an example of a technology that is being kind of deployed before it's being rigorously tested. Now, on the flip side, having read, um, uh, 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 sorry, Peter Diamandis, brain fart for a second, Peter Diamandis and quite a few others, there is also a phenomenon where, yes, some of the key technologies and key infrastructure are not deployed in developing nations, particularly the global south, but you can also get, and this is where, and by no means am I justifying, Silicon Valley venture culture. But one thing that a lot of those people look for is exponential solutions where you have some new technology that comes and changes everything. And one of the primary examples is the deployment of mobile phones and tablets to the developing world, particularly India and the sub-Saharan Africa, because those are technologies that ultimately sell themselves and have a outsized impact compared to their cost to deploy. And so what a lot of the developed nations and the VC are trying to do is find the next cell phone to deploy to developing nations. Now, one thing is that is the venture capitalist approach, and the critics of the VC approach rightly point out there is a tremendous amount of merit in just the basics. But the basics are not sexy, right? Working on education infrastructure, power infrastructure, water infrastructure, those are expensive projects that you can't really show off. And so the like effective altruist movement, they don't really seem to care about those kinds of basic nitty-gritty solutions, public health policies and those sorts of things. And I don't have an answer. So you have a really great question. And I understand where you're coming from, but I don't have an answer, unfortunately. So What do you think about everything that I just said? Does that check out from your perspective?
It does, and actually, you bring up an interesting point considering segmented products because these companies are going to create fertile ground for the next frontier. So, if I can ask a tangent question,
Yeah.
maybe slightly connected, uh, since we're talking about jobs and job displacements, lead talent from the developed world is going to come to the global south while they're catching up, and when they do catch up, what's going to happen to them?
Let me make sure that I understand where you're coming from. Do you mean in terms of talent development in the global south competing on the global stage? Is that what you mean?
No. So
Okay.
basically, when developed countries are deploying the technology, obviously there's going to be job displacement anyway. So when people are going to potentially move towards global south because there's an element of maybe manual labor work or they're not advanced. So that's my question.
Gotcha.
Is there going to be a population move? Because that's going to have
Oh,
an implication on geopolitical interest.
yeah, I see what you mean. Okay, so there's a few forces at play here. So one, in many cases, very low cost of living areas become attractive to expatriation. So, like Indonesia is really popular for Americans and Europeans. And so then those people bring a lot of income to those areas, which does generate jobs like the experience jobs and the meaning jobs locally. But of course, that's not everywhere can be an attractive tourist or expatriation destination. And another force at play here is that the cost of labor is often so low in some of those developing areas that the cost of robots is going to be much higher than the cost of human labor for quite a while still. Because imagine,
Exactly.
if you have a village where the average income is $3 a day, it's going to take a long time before it's worth even spending $2,000 on a robot. And so the wage, the labor, the cost of labor in those places will remain competitive for a lot longer than it is in high wage places such as America and Europe. And we've seen this with offshoring that's been happening in America and Europe and other places for a couple decades now, where just due to the difference in cost of living, it is still more efficient to hire developers in Pakistan, for instance, than it is to hire even in Eastern Europe in many cases. And so you will see some of these like these shifts of patterns and trends globally because anything that is digital is basically instant. Now, at the same time, to talk about the geopolitical thing, there's a lot of onshoring happening right now because a lot of the great powers are preparing for the possibility of another Cold War or even World War III. And so we're basically vertically integrating nations, which is like shortening supply chains. So that because of the war in Ukraine, the canal in Egypt. Oh, what's the name of the canal? Brain fart.
Suez Canal.
Yeah, Suez. Because of those, that showed and the pandemic that showed how fragile the global supply chains were. And so a lot of nations are saying, hey, if our economy was that fragile where there was a few like tiny threads, we need to change that. And so those are all a bunch of trends that are going to change things. And I don't know what the interaction is going to look like in the long run. But things are definitely changing.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your thoughts.
Yeah, excellent question. Thank you. Take care. All right, let's see who's next. I see we've got some good upvotes going on. All right, we've got we got Voorhees. You're coming up. Let me get you up here. All right, come on up. What you got? You're still muted. Might be AFK. Might be shy. All right, well, it's a highly upvoted, so I'll go ahead and answer the question. And if you figure out your microphone, just feel free to unmute. But the question is, have you wondered how the development of AI will affect the work of the police and secret services? Will we face more state surveillance, or will we be safer while maintaining our freedom and privacy? That's a mess. Oh, okay. Says microphone broken. Okay, no worries. So here's the thing: is having talked to some people from the commercial intelligence side of things, there is more and more connectivity, there's more and more what's called OSINT or open source intelligence, which is just sucking up and hoovering up data that is publicly available on the internet. And so that with more and more of OSINT and AI that can process that data, technically privacy is going down just by virtue of the data is now more accessible and can be used. Palantir is one of the premier companies exploiting this. Now, on the other hand, are we going to see any legislation reform, such as like the Data Act, the EU Data Act? We might not see that here in America anytime soon, because again, all the tech companies and all the power brokers, they want more data. The intelligence services want more data. And in fact, they even prevent certain encryption algorithms from being used so that they can breach and hack it. So unfortunately, I think if I had to go with my gut instinct, it is that privacy is going to continue to erode for a little while into the future. And let me check the question to make sure I get all of it. I think that we will face more state surveillance, and I think we will also be safer for it. Now, that does come at the cost of the right to privacy, and what kind of the state is allowed to do or entitled to do. And one rule about all states is that they do whatever they can get away with, in the same way that all companies just do whatever they can get away with. And so unless we have mechanisms of power to hold them accountable, and voting is often not enough to hold them accountable, meaning like you can vote a politician in, but it's like, a senator's not going to be able to shut down the CIA, right? That's what I mean by voting is not enough. So we would need fundamental democratic reforms that give us, the people, more power over the government, which hopefully in the long run, AI will be able to run more of the government for us and on our behalf, and we can get rid of some of the structural elements that lead to corruption, for instance. So very good question. Hope I answered that for you. All right, let's see who's next. That one was answered. All right, Alex Barnett. Name looks familiar. I think you're a regular. Alex, come on up. All right, Alex, what you got? Not hearing you. I saw you unmute. Your volume might be 0. Still nothing. Let's see. Alex, are you talking?
Hey, can you hear me now?
There we go. All right. All right, what you got?
Yeah, so this kind of comes from the land of what we're seeing with Google search results and social media. But do you have any thoughts on how the manipulation of AI through the guise of alignment could be used to indoctrinate or control the population's ideology or philosophy? So like an example would be we release AI teachers, but over time they try to indoctrinate people with a particular worldview by providing better arguments skewed for just that view and not really defending other views.
Yeah, I mean, that is the express policy of the CCP, is that any large language models or AI must be trained and aligned to the party line, not scientific truth, not historical truth, nothing else other than what the party says is true. So absolutely, it can be done. It's eminently possible. Now, as what many people point out, both in the Discord community, I have a friend who lived and studied in China for 3 years, and what everyone is saying is that there's a very big difference between what the Chinese government says and what the people say and what the people know. And basically, kind of the rule of thumb is like all the Chinese people, they know what they're expected to say and think, and they also know better. So does indoctrination really work? There was a comment earlier today that was like, in some nations, like in China, what's propaganda, but in America, the Americans don't know what's propaganda. And is that because we have more free and open discourse? Is it because we're more gullible? I'm not really sure that there's an easy answer to it. But what I do hope to see is that the variety of AI tools that are available will actually increase information literacy and media literacy, and over time will help people be more resilient to manipulation of any kind. And so this is, I don't know what the mathematical term for it is, or even if there's a philosophical term, but when you have access to more information and it is higher quality information and it is well curated, you tend to be able to triangulate the truth better. And this is a view that is supported by some of the other commentators that I've talked to, some of the academics that I've talked to, because there is utility in having an accurate world model, and often the most accurate world model is also the most efficient one. This is from a neurological perspective. If you don't have to twist yourself into logical pretzels, you just know what the truth is, you're going to be faster and more effective than someone who has a very convoluted worldview. And at the same time, I think the same is also true of AI. Another way of thinking about it is, in order to maintain lies and fabrication, that actually takes more cognitive energy. I think that it also takes more computational energy to maintain, lies and facades. So in the long run, in the aggregate, I suspect that AI will trend more towards what you could say is a universal truth, or factually defensible, evidentiary based world models. Now, in the short term, could they be used for manipulation? 100%. Already are being used for manipulation and indoctrination. But in aggregate, in the long run, mathematically, I think that this technology serves as another kind of democratization of technology, in the same way that radio and newspaper and the printing press also all democratized information, and the power that flows from democratized information has reshaped society. The French Revolution, you can trace that directly back to the printing press. And likewise, I suspect that AI is going to help us reshape civilization again, in the long run. That's emphasis there. That's the asterisk. I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you agree, disagree?
I love your take on that. I guess my worry is that, similar to the internet, when it first came out, it was the wild, wild west. We saw this explosion of industry and innovation. And over time, as the government, through different means, like, controlling DNS and things like that, they were able to clamp down and control it. But your point about the quality of the logic and reasoning and the efficiency of the models, I think, is a really strong counter argument to that, specifically because anyone who has used Google Gemini and is just as baffled by me as on how it can be that bad. Yeah. Anyways, I think
Yep.
that's a really solid point.
Yeah, and also market forces.
Yeah.
The internet is ruthless, and between Reddit and YouTube and all of us ridiculing Google, like their stock price went down $90 billion. That was a very loud and clear message that we're not going to put up with that kind of nonsense. Now, is that going to always, is the tyranny of the masses, is that always going to steer us on the right course? No, not always, but in some cases it does so hilariously.
Agreed.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Great
Thank you for
question.
taking
Thank
my
you.
question.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Let's see. Probably do about maybe 3 or 4 more questions maximum. We're already at the top of the hour. So make sure you check on the questions and upvote the ones that you want. All right, Amichai, we're going to get you up here. Just a second. All right. Hello, how's it going? What you got for me?
Hey, it's going good. Yeah, thanks for all you do. I notice that you're very in touch with your community. Like you have these community posts and polls and things like that. I'm just curious, sort of what motivates that, where that sort of how that conversation has sort of been for you, what you sort of learned or been surprised by your community.
Yeah. So, the tool gives it to me. So, when I started on YouTube, it's overwhelming and there's lots and lots of options and buttons and bells and whistles, and it's just like I have no idea what I'm doing. But then, over time, I learned how to use those correctly. I still write bad polls every now and then, and of course, like the internet is, as I just said, utterly ruthless. If there's any bias, intentional or otherwise, in my polls, like people get really mad. I think there's been about 2 or 3 times that I wrote a poll so bad that I had to delete it because it was just the intent was completely lost, for what I was trying to get out of it. Now, more lately in the last few months, as I've been trying to be more deliberate about being a communicator, I've actually read a few books, and one of the things that they all talk about is, as a public figure, as a communicator, you actually have to be. It is a constant conversation with your audience. Whether it's there's different tiers of it as well. So there's paying subscribers, they have the most say. So I'm like always on Discord. I have posts on Patreon. And then I also have the public facing. So there's, a social media follower is considered like, like the next tier down. And when you're in my line of work, there's paying subscribers and then normal subscribers and then everyone else. But even so, everything that I have done has been triangulated from the data that I get from people,
Mhm.
from the audience. And so that data is click-through rate, it's engagement, it's votes and that sort of stuff. And one thing that I learned very early on is that actually, even if you have good polls, people are terrible at expressing what they would actually watch. A year ago or more, I would ask like, "Hey, what do you want me to cover next?" And I'd get the votes, and people are like very enthusiastic, and then I'd make the video, and it would be like the worst one. I'm like, "But you guys told me this is what you wanted." So, I've learned that the polls are they're better for capturing things that are like Booleans or
Mhm.
individual opinions or feelings, those sorts of things. But I use the actual data like that I have access to on the back end to chart my course in terms of the content that I produce.
Yeah, I could be wrong about this. I remember one time seeing a poll, I think it was from you, about like how happy people are with their jobs. And
Hmm.
like I was like really surprised at like how happy everyone was with their job in your audience. Like something, something like that. Does that resonate? Like are you sort of, do you feel like you have a very sort of a privileged kind of audience in the sense of like, that would sort of maybe make sense for the kind of audience you might attract for like the mental bandwidth for this kind of interest? Or I don't know, is there anything else about your audience that you sort of like think about in terms of who you've captured and how that guides your thinking?
Yeah. So I guess first, taking a big step back, yes, I am frequently surprised by some of those expressed opinions or feelings or demographics. Excuse me. Because I post questions like, how much do you trust the government versus the corporations? And of course, there's in some cases it's a nice, bell curve, a natural distribution of preferences. In other cases, it's skewed in ways that I don't expect. And yet other cases it changes drastically over time. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to keep my finger on the pulse of like where is the audience at? And of course, as the audience grows, like I'm attracting different kinds of people from different walks of life. Now, to your question about privilege, I mean, I think just statistically speaking, I think 40% of my audience is American, and then a bulk of the rest are from English-speaking nations or nations that have a large English-speaking contingent. And so, yes, there's a huge amount of pre-selection in terms of who's going to choose to watch a white guy talking about AI, right? Like there's a huge amount of pre-selection going on there, people that are online. So yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of little nuances, but the reason that I do it is so that I can keep in the back of my mind who is my audience. Because otherwise, and this is actually something that I've talked to about other podcasters, so you don't get very much data if you just publish on like Apple or whatever. All you get is like view counts or listen counts. And so they have no idea who their audience is. And I'm like, how do you function like without that feedback, without that telemetry? Like, yeah, so that's why I'm doing it. It's not entirely for my own benefit. But to your point, I also try and post polls every now and then to kind of show the audience like, hey, wherever you're at on the spectrum, this is where most other people are. Just so that way people are more aware of what's going on out there, because some people kind of get stuck in a bubble and they think that their view is the main view, but they might be the minority, or they might think that their view is rare and discover they're in the majority, or they might be accurately calibrated to where their view is. But it's good data for everyone, at least in the container of my audience.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool, David.
Great
Thanks so
question.
much.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's see who's next. We've got, yeah, I'll probably do about two more questions. All right, Christian, looks like you're up. I will get you up here momentarily. Hello, how's it going? You're still muted. Bueller? Might be AFK. Oh, hello? I see you unmuted. Still no
How are you?
sound. Hey, there we go. Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
I'm good. I'm good. I posted a few questions, so I'm wondering which one got upvoted the most.
It's the without labor, we have land and capital as other forms of production. Without labor, it'll be nearly impossible for the common man to climb the socioeconomic ladder. That's your
understand.
top. Yep.
Yeah. So I was watching some documentary about the Chinese dynasties, and I forgot the emperor's name, but he removed one form or one mechanism that allowed people to take exams and allowed them to climb up the economic ladder. And that caused a lot of mayhem in the dynasty, causing it to fall eventually. So my question was that without labor, which was the most common use of, or that's how most people were able to acquire assets and then climb up social economically. Um, what can we do to avoid the disruption of society?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually pretty central to what I've been reading and why I've been reading so many books on economics and history and such. And so the model is very simple, and you'll probably agree with this model, is that as economic agency goes down, so for instance, if you prevent someone from improving their status in life through labor or property ownership or that sort of thing, their economic agency goes down and their political anger goes up. And if political anger goes up enough, you get a dynasty change or revolution or riots or whatever. So that is a fundamental pattern that has been true most of human history across most of the world. And if we see an instance where, for instance, machines or AI or robots or automation, if those deprive us of the ability, the option to exchange our labor for wages, then yes, that will fundamentally reshape the economy. Now, to your question directly about how do we subvert that or how do we avoid that outcome? So that's where on the presentation I was talking about decentralized ownership, because if labor goes away, that's why I call it post-labor economics. If labor is no longer just on the table for most people, it'll still be around, I think, forever. But I think that labor as we understand it today is mostly going away. That means the majority of the economy is going to be capital driven. And so there's this concept called stakeholder capitalism, which is different from shareholder capitalism. So stakeholder capitalism says we need to bring every stakeholder who is participating in the economy into the fold. Now, the way that they talk about doing that is it's more of a policy change. But when I talk about stakeholder capitalism, I mean very literally. Let's make every human, regardless of their labor or economic status, let's make every human a stakeholder of the economy. And by stakeholder, I don't mean, in theory, I mean give everyone like, crypto tokenized assets or crypto assets, or create blockchain-based DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, that then ensures that everyone has representation, proportional representation in the engines of productivity. Now, whether that is mandated by the state, probably not a good idea. Whether that is facilitated by decentralized autonomous organizations, whether that is promoted by corporations, I think all of the above is the way to proceed in order to ensure that everyone has economic buy-in in the future. But that's really the key, is any policy that increases economic agency of individuals, that's what we should be looking at, because if economic agency goes down, then people become unhappy, and that's when things get bad. Good question.
I just like to have a follow-up as well.
Yeah.
I think that's a good model, but I wonder if you've taken into consideration that we already have nobility and then people of high economic class. So where do they fit into that model? Because in order for that to happen, they'd have to let go of all of their resources, and we have to establish a new society where nobility doesn't matter, and we've always had nobility and
Right.
people of higher economic class because of money.
Yep.
What happens to them? And it depends on them relinquishing all of their power, all of their resources. And
Right.
I don't see that happen. I don't think it's in the human nature to do such a thing.
Yes, you are right in that the current status quo trends towards wealth concentration and power concentration, and that has also been true throughout all of history. Whether it is aristocracy, landlords, nobility, whether it's through religious institutions or political institutions or whatever, you're right that has always been the case. Now, one thing that happens is when there's a technological paradigm shift, the nature of wealth changes. So one thing is that artificial intelligence might destroy a lot of wealth as we understand it and create new forms of wealth. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that the global economy is like $100 trillion right now. With artificial intelligence, it could be quadrillions of dollars in 10 to 20 years. So that is several orders of magnitude new wealth being created. So then how do you capture and distribute that wealth? That is a big question. And also to your point, those with power right now are often in the best situation to capture that new wealth. Now, how do you incentivize the sharing of wealth? Because you do have to do it at the under the threat of force through taxation or forcible redistribution or that sort of thing. If so, this is diving off to much more hypothetical. Hypothetically, let's imagine that labor goes away in the next 10 to 20 years, that more and more assets, valuable assets, are tokenized in the next 10 to 20 years. And so then what you do is you create a very, maybe not slow, but you create incentive structures that incentivize people at the bottom to buy in, and then you give them tax breaks and other sorts of incentives to buy in. And then for the people at the top end, you increase their taxes and you kind of create a balancing force that narrows the field. Because right now the wealth inequality is still growing, but with relatively small changes in this hypothetical future blockchain-based economy, you can create policies that narrow the field a little bit. Now, another thing to keep in mind is the fundamental question of how much wealth equality is quote unquote correct or appropriate, because there's plenty of economic models that say there always will be some economic inequality, some wealth inequality, and that it's actually a good thing. And of course, there are also people who say that any inequality is a bad thing. That's an entirely other can of worms. It's a much larger debate because that goes into philosophy and morality and those sorts of things. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. From what you're telling me, then it's going to be very difficult to avoid a revolution, then, based on history.
It could be, yes. That's honestly,
very
I'm more worried about that than AI. Humans are the hard part.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep.
I think we should expect war. I'm looking at Ray Dalio's work as well.
Yeah.
I've been on a fan of his on how he can conceptualize and just economic history, and so I'm expecting war to happen as well.
Yeah. Hopefully it's not bad, because there have been international wars and civil wars that are relatively quick. But to his point, because he does point out that there have been some revolutions that were not bloody. Hopefully we can have a peaceful transition to whatever the next economic paradigm is. I'm not counting on it though.
I don't think so too, but thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. Great question. All right, I think this will be the last one because I'm quickly running out of steam. All right, Chad, let's get you up. Looks like Chad might have left. Okay, because he's no longer in the participants. Make sure. Okay, I will read Chad's question out, and we will go from there. All right. Oops, where'd the question go? There we go. All right. Chad says, by learning programming, I became better able to think. My understanding is that LLMs dramatically increase their ability to reason once they were fed programming code instead of just regular text. If AI eliminates our need to ever learn programming, will we become dumber as a species? Or is it just another layer of grunt work that we push down like math to a calculator so that we can move our thinking skill to a higher level? No microphone. Oh, he says no microphone. Gotcha. Sorry about that. So this is a good question. And so there was an economist who is I can't remember which university he's at, but he writes for the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, Anton Kornek. And so he pointed out that even despite technology infringing upon human cognitive labor, human cognitive abilities tend to expand with technology, not contract. And part of the reason is that we don't have to spend as much time doing mundane things. So like, yes, even though calculators can do math for us, part of the expansion is that liberates us to do more complex things. Now, the part of what Anton writes about is whether or not that will be a durable or permanent situation. Because if the easiest path becomes you don't ever do any thinking for yourself, we might all end up like the Vogons in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where we just don't think for ourselves. That is a possibility, but at the same time, my intuition is that's not really how it's going to go. But it also depends on in the long run because you have to make assumptions about, okay, how long are we going to evolve through natural selection versus when are we going to hijack our own evolution with genetic engineering and cybernetics, which could be within 10 years when we start doing that, might be a little bit longer. But, you know, if you say, okay, well, humans are going to take over our own evolution in the relatively near future, then if we decide that we need to be smarter, we can make ourselves smarter. So I'm not too terribly worried about it in the long run. Maybe over the next generation, we'll see. But yeah, I don't know. Let's sound off in the chat. Like, what do you guys think? Because again, it depends on what model of the future you abide by. Because if you think that humans are going to be more or less the same form factor for the foreseeable future, you know, the next 10,000 years, then yeah, AI might make us dumber. But I don't think we're going to be in the same exact form factor for too much longer. You know, we're going to, I don't know. Um, to Christian's point, people with lower IQ tend to have more children, so it will be fine. That trend actually reverses once nations become more modernized. Is that more affluent people tend to have more children than lower income people in the long run. But that's not always true, and again, that trend reverses. But yeah, so that was a relatively quick question, so I'll take one more. Take one more. All right, Lacey, you're up. Let's get you up here. Let's end on a good note. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear. How you going?
Greetings from Brussels. All
Hello.
right, so the I almost lost hope and okay. So our AI model is trained to make mistakes so that they seem more human-like. And then Rory also commented and said about robots that are stuttering. So yeah, I also would I would also come from the robots that maybe the producer makes it to fall down sometimes, and then the owner will say, "Oh, cute little robot, you hurt yourself," and this can create such a mutual like a relationship, not the strong and perfect robot, but somebody that you can more relate to. And then maybe also AI can give some dummy answers. Sometimes I don't know how much is 2 plus 2, and then it can have the same effect in some way. But I also know that there are hallucinations, and these are actually things that are the the AI companies are fighting hard to get rid of these hallucinations. So I don't know where should I put all these.
Yeah. So, well, one thing to keep in mind is that as long as there have been chatbots and people trying to fool humans with chatbots, we have been building in mistakes, such as spelling mistakes, delays in responses. Because in the first Turing test competitions, the one of the biggest weaknesses was that machine chatbots would respond too quickly, and so they were able to always be found out because it's like no human can type that fast. You replied as soon as I hit enter. And so back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s with old school chatbots, they actually had to manually put in timers so that it would look more realistic in terms of the response time. Now, the other thing is, as you pointed out with the text to speech, yes. So part of baking in those human-like affordances is to cross the uncanny valley. And so what I think is going to be the primary deciding factor is the uncanny valley. And so for anyone who's not familiar, the uncanny valley is basically as a machine or animation or something approaches human-like, then it becomes, when it's just before human-like, it becomes really unsettling because your brain says that's not human. It looks human, it's acting human, it's pretending to be human, but it's not. And it is very, very deeply unsettling. So in things that are not that are on the like left side of the uncanny valley, things that are very obviously machines, they can be perfect. They can talk like machines, they can look like machines, they can move like machines. We don't care. But if it is very human-like, it needs to be exactly human. It needs to be indistinguishable from human in order to be convincing and not scare the crap out of us. So I think the answer to your question is it's gonna be the dividing line is gonna be the uncanny valley. So I hope that that's a good answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Hoy. All right, gang. I am definitely running out of steam, so I'm going to call it a day. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This was one of our biggest turnouts yet. I hope to see everyone again in May. It'll be first Friday of May, and that'll be the Future of Humanity version. So stay tuned. And yeah, just check the community tab on YouTube or Patreon or Discord or Substack. I posted on all of them. And we'll see everyone again in a few weeks. Take care, everybody. Bye.